Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this presentation on engagement and motivation. My name is Catherine Bro, and I'm a teacher and board-certified behavior analyst, and I'm a learning specialist with the Autism Learning Partnership branch of the Department of Education and Early Childhood Development. Our branch develops and delivers autism training for preschool autism agencies and the Anglophone and Francophone sectors of the K-12 school system here in New Brunswick. This presentation is about some tools that you can use to influence your students' engagement and motivation. Originally, the title included during remote learning, but I removed these words because it's about engagement and motivation for learning, no matter the context. These tools are rooted in the principles of science of behavior, known as applied behavior analysis, or ABA. The tools apply to all learners, and they can be used in the classroom and in remote learning contexts. Behavior analysis is often associated with autism, but it has strong foundations in other settings as well. In fact, ABA is applicable everywhere there is behavior. During the presentation, your mics and cameras are turned off, but if you have questions, please enter them in the chat box and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. So as I was saying, the principles and tools I'm going to share today are at the root of engaging learners, no matter what subject or level you teach. There. When I started putting this presentation together, we didn't know what school was going to look like in the fall. And although we're planning for the reopening of schools in September, and we have a plan, the reality is we don't know what's going to happen with this pandemic. We've transitioned from classroom-based to online and other home learning options, and now we're looking at all students returning to the classroom, but with a combination of formats for some students. So whether you're teaching face-to-face in the classroom, online, or with some combination of the two, these tools apply to you and to your students.
We can't see your screen, Catherine.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure what happened. I've lost my, oh, there it is. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so before we move on, I want to make sure that we share the same understanding of engagement. Engagement refers to the amount and quality of energy that students invest in learning activities. When a student is engaged, they focus their attention on the learning activities, they're interested and invested in what they are learning, they participate and/or they feel involved, and they feel connected to the concepts and other people in the learning environment. Engagement is important because when a student is engaged, they learn more and they learn more efficiently. Engagement is influenced by the teacher, the student themselves, the school, family and community, and curriculum. The three key components of engagement are motivation, attention, and interest. In this presentation, I'm going to focus primarily on motivation. Towards the end, I'll talk a little bit about attention and interests, and I'll give you some links to resources that can help maximize those components. So motivation refers to the desire to act or to do something. It plays a critical role in engagement, and it's often at the top of the list of barriers to successful learning. Motivation is about what students do in terms of time, persistence, getting help when they need it, and how they approach content and assessment. It's often thought to be an internal state or characteristic, but in fact, motivation depends on what's going on in the environment. It develops over time, and motivation changes because of one's experiences with learning and other circumstances. Aspects of the learning environment can both trigger and sustain motivation and learning. And because of this relationship between motivation and the environment, there are two ways that you can directly influence motivation as a teacher. The first way to influence motivation occurs before behavior, meaning before students ever begin their learning tasks. It's what you do in advance of the learning assignments. Things that happen before behavior occur are known as antecedents. and you can use antecedents to influence motivation. The second way to influence motivation occurs after the behavior, or after students begin and/or when they complete learning tasks. What happens after behavior is known as the consequence. And just like with antecedents, you can use consequences to influence behavior. Now, just to be clear, when I talk about consequences, I am generally talking about something satisfying that occurs because of behavior and increases the likelihood that that behavior will occur again. This is known as positive reinforcement. I'm not referring to the concept of consequences that we often use in schools and use when we're referring to punishment, actually, that is intended to eliminate unwanted behavior. Although that can influence motivation, the problem with punishment is that it doesn't teach students what they should do instead, and it's likely to have a detrimental impact on motivation. To get the results you want, you need to do the right things, and the right things occur when you use antecedents and reinforcement to your advantage. Let's pause here just for a quick review. What is engagement? Is it A, the amount and quality of energy students invest in learning? B, the desire to act or do something? C, an internal state or characteristic that happens before behavior occurs? You can just think to yourself about what answer. If you picked A, you're correct. Engagement is the amount and quality of energy students invest in learning. Here's another one. What are antecedents and consequences? Is it A, antecedents are what happen after behavior and consequences are punishment for unwanted behavior? Is it B, antecedents are what happens before behavior and consequences are what happens after behavior? Or is the answer C, antecedents are a tool to influence motivation and consequences are a tool to influence engagement? If you picked B, the answer, you are correct. Antecedents are what happens before behavior, and consequences are what happen after behavior, and we can use both of those to influence motivation. So let's take a closer look at that. So, how do you use antecedents to influence motivation? There are several ways. Remember that antecedents are things that come before behavior, and they serve to get it going or prompt it to occur. In the context of learning, it means the way the teacher sets up conditions for learning and reminds students about what to do and when to do it. Some ways you can enhance motivation and engagement before learning activities begin include giving choices, providing variety, setting students up for success, building in connection, and making learning relevant. So let's look at each of these. Offering choices doesn't mean that you allow students to do whatever they want. You remain in control of the learning goals, but you provide options for tasks or materials that students can choose from. Choice helps improve engagement because students are more likely to be motivated and engaged when they're working with materials, activities, and topics that they enjoy and/or that they care about. Providing choice is also a good way to differentiate activities to meet the needs of all learners in your classroom. Doing the same thing repeatedly leads to boredom, and boredom undermines motivation and engagement. You can add variety to help keep students motivated by using different learning tools, materials, activities, and assignments. It's also equally important to set your students up to be successful. Nothing undermines motivation more than frustration or failure or fear of failure. When it comes to remote learning tasks especially, your tasks need to be easy to access, well organized, make needed materials readily available, and include clear, easy to understand instructions. If your students get frustrated and don't know what to do, they're not going to do it. Ensure the level of your remote learning activities are in line with your students' level of achievement. You may need to differentiate activities to meet the needs of all students in the class. Some ways that you can do this: you might provide checklists, graphic organizers, visuals, or other supports so students clearly understand what needs to be done, how to do it, and how far they've come. You may need to provide more support than normal when students are learning and working on activities outside of the classroom. Help students form new habits and routines by ensuring that they know how to get help if they need it, and communicate often with students and parents, especially when students are working outside of the classroom. Connection refers to the relationship that students have with each other and with the teacher. Engagement increases when students feel like they belong and are part of something. Provide opportunities for students to connect with you and each other to discuss coursework, struggles, and successes. Interacting with content, the teacher, and other students helps reduce transactional distance. And this is just a fancy term that means how distant we feel from learning. The more distant students feel from you and their peers, the less motivated they are to engage. When I was writing this, it reminded me of a young man that I worked with who was in grade 9. And I was asked to assess his academic skills. He wasn't doing so well in school. And often wasn't coming to school. And the assessment indicated that his skills were on par for grade level, and people couldn't figure out why he didn't come to school and why he wasn't doing very well. And it turned out it was about connection. He didn't have any relationships with his teachers, and didn't have great relationships with his peers. And the reason I thought about this young man as I was putting this together is because if I'd known then what I know now, I think providing those connections would have had a bigger impact on his long-term success in school, than some of the other interventions we had put in place at the time. So the other thing about using antecedents is that the assignments and the tasks that you ask students to do need to be relevant. They need to perceive the learning activities as meaningful. So if they don't see something as worthy of their time or effort, they won't engage and they'll do the minimum. Relevance can be built in by connecting activities to previous knowledge and experiences. You can highlight the value of an activity. You can model and help demonstrate why the activity is relevant and how things are used in real life. So antecedents are really important. They help get behavior going. They set students up to be successful, but it's the consequences that will determine if the behavior continues, whether or not your students remain engaged, whether they remain motivated to keep learning. Keeping students engaged is dependent on what happens after they begin the tasks. Remember that when behavior is followed by something that is desired, it continues. If it's followed by something undesired, it goes away. These are the consequences that determine whether engagement will continue or dissipate over time. All behavior follows this antecedent behavior consequence sequence, or the ABCs. Consequences can occur naturally, but they can also be delivered by someone else. The consequence that keeps behavior going depends on the individual. What motivates me to do the things I do is different from what motivates you to do the things that you do. And the same applies to our student. Every student is motivated by something different. So you can use positive reinforcement. Remember that if something follows behavior and that behavior increases, it means the person finds some value in the consequence. And this is known as positive reinforcement. If something is removed or avoided following behavior and the behavior increases, we call this negative reinforcement. The distinction here is important when you think about your relationships with your students. Do you only connect when they do something wrong or they're not getting it right? If so, you may inadvertently undermine engagement and set students up to do enough to avoid an uncomfortable encounter with you. You want students to be engaged because of you, not to spite you. So it's best to start with positive reinforcement to support engagement and motivation and save the corrective measures for when reinforcement doesn't work. Positive reinforcement is a basic principle in the science of behavior. So it works even if students aren't aware that it's happening. It also means it applies to everyone, regardless of age or ability. Positive reinforcement is really important. It shapes almost every aspect of our daily behavior because it helps us get the things we want and avoid things we don't want. So let's do another review. What are 2 ways that you can influence motivation? Is it A, consequences and reinforcement, B, choices and punishment, or C, antecedents and consequences? If you picked C, you're correct. The 2 ways that you can influence motivation are by using antecedents and consequences. Positive reinforcement refers to A, when something follows a behavior and that behavior increases, B, when something is taken away following a behavior and that behavior increases, or C, when something follows a behavior and that behavior decreases. If you picked A, you're correct. Positive reinforcement refers to when something follows a behavior and the behavior increases. Take a moment to read this little cartoon. In this cartoon, the teacher praises the student for listening quietly to others, and he continues to listen quietly. In this example, which is highly oversimplified, the antecedent is the teacher's question. The behavior is listening quietly to classmates, and the consequence is praise. In this example, we would say praise is a reinforcer for listening quietly, meaning it's the thing that follows the behavior that makes that behavior more likely to occur. Praise is a social consequence, meaning it is provided by someone else after the behavior occurs. Naturally occurring consequences, or reinforcers, happen in everyday life as a result of behavior. Think about eating a warm cookie after baking, or having a light come on after flicking the switch when it's too dark. Enjoying the process of learning, or the sense of mastery when you gain a new skill. Think of the sense of accomplishment you feel when you complete a task. These are all naturally occurring consequences, or naturally occurring reinforcers. Social consequences, on the other hand, are provided by someone else. Examples include praise and recognition, positive feedback, pats on the back, and so on. One of the most effective social reinforcers is praise. Praise is valued by many students. It helps increase their sense of competence, and which is important for motivation, but it also contributes to a positive learning environment. Praise can be especially helpful for encouraging students to build habits. Praise helps get behavior going and maintains it until students' skills allow them to access natural reinforcers, which don't require someone to deliver them. Think about a student learning a new math or reading strategy, for example. If they don't quite get it right, it can feel like punishment, but getting it right is reinforcement. In the early phases of learning, getting it wrong more often than getting it right overrides the natural reinforcer. They just don't get to experience it. Praise for effort and perseverance can keep the behavior going until the student more consistently gets it right and connects to the natural reinforcer. So here are some tips for using praise. You want it to be specific. Identify what the student did well and deliver the praise in a sincere and enthusiastic tone of voice. And it's always better to praise effort than ability. When appropriate, make it public. However, don't use praise too much, so you don't want to overuse it, or don't use it lavishly. If you overuse it, it'll become meaningless. You want to praise the behavior that really deserves it. Students learn many things in everyday life because of naturally occurring reinforcers. But some students aren't motivated by these naturally occurring outcomes when it comes to academic tasks. For these students, we need to find other ways to influence motivation so they willingly engage in learning. The key for these students is to find what they value enough to work for and to give it to them when they demonstrate the behavior you want to see. And this is where contrived reinforcers come in. So we can tell students what we expect and what the rules are, and most will follow through. But for some students, we need to set up a contingency to get them to meet our expectations or follow the rules. Setting up a contingency simply means setting up an if-then relationship where the student earns a reinforcer if they meet our expectations. In these situations, the reinforcer is contrived, which means it's planned and provided by someone else for the purpose of modifying behavior. Perhaps one of the most valuable contrived reinforcers is money. Money is highly motivating because it helps us get things we like and avoid things we don't want. I'm not suggesting that you pay your students to meet your expectations, though. Other examples of contrived reinforcers include tangible rewards, point systems, token economies, and so on. Contrived reinforcers need to be powerful, which means they need to be something the student wants. There should be a high probability that the students will earn the planned reinforcer, and it should be presented in such a way that it doesn't interfere with naturally occurring reinforcers. So you don't want to use them as a bribe, for example. And when I say that there should be a high probability that they will earn it, it means you're setting them up to be successful. If you don't do that, students will only do enough to get the promised reward, or they'll only work on tasks when rewards are offered. So you want to try to use contrived reinforcers that are also related to the behavior you want to see. For example, iPad use is a reward that I often see being used in school. iPad use with educational apps is related to completing tasks, but undefined free time is not. A contrived reinforcer can be a naturally occurring reinforcer for other behavior. For example, listening to music while completing a task or doing a project related to an area of personal interest. Another option is to make the reinforcer related to participation. An example that I've seen my own children using during this period of home learning is Kahoot and other apps that entice them to participate in class online meetings. To make the use of contrived reinforcers work long-term, you need to always provide praise and link you need to always provide praise and then make a link to the natural reinforcer for the student when you give them that contrived reinforcer. The reason you do this is you want to help students make the connection between their behavior and the natural reinforcer. If you do this successfully, over time, you can provide less and less of the contrived reinforcer while the natural reinforcer keeps the behavior going. Fading out planned reinforcers is generally done by increasing the amount of time or the amount of work required to earn the contrived reinforcer while you continue to provide social reinforcers and point out natural reinforcers. Helping students make the connection to natural reinforcers helps them learn to engage for its own sake, because things are interesting or enjoyable, or it helps them to achieve a goal. Like with antecedents, you don't want to rely entirely on contrived reinforcers, mostly because students will only engage enough to earn the reinforcer and stop engaging if they grow tired of the items that you provide, or if the reinforcer becomes unavailable for some reason. So getting your students' attention and helping them maintain it during learning tasks can be as simple as adjusting the duration of tasks and providing short breaks, removing distractions when possible, chunking tasks, using visuals, telling stories, asking questions, and managing the amount of information you convey during a lesson. Help your students pay attention, and you help them stay motivated and engaged. When students are interested in a topic, they are also more willing to engage. In addition to using topics of interest, you can help build interest with the materials and tasks you assign. Think back to antecedents and look at choice and variety, for example. You can align student interests with other learning opportunities, energize them to want to know more, or demonstrate your own interests in topics or activities by the way you introduce and discuss tasks. There are a host of resources available to help you design remote learning activities that grab and sustain student attention and interest. For more information about the tools and resources available, I would really encourage you to view the recorded webinars and resources by Dr. Lotta Larson that can be accessed through our One SharePoint site. So if you go to the One site, and under My Tools, you will see Sora Support Resources. If you click here, it will open a new tab, And when you scroll down, you can find this box that has the schedule, April till June. And the 2 recorded webinars with Dr. Larson are at the end of the list, June 4th and June 11th. You simply click on the link and there is a password provided so that you can view the recorded webinar. In addition, on that tab, you will also have access to all the slides and to all of the links and resources that Dr. Larson discusses in her webinar. Both are highly informative and full of lots and lots of tools that are useful for classroom learning and for remote learning. So one thing I would like to say is that you're aiming for progress, not perfection. These tools are tried and true, but it doesn't always mean that results will be optimized, because for some learners, there are going to be critical elements that are beyond your control. Consider results to be a continuum rather than a dichotomy. The goal is to move students in the desired direction. Results require doing something more, doing something less, or doing something differently. Look for the behavior you want to see more of and reinforce it. If students are exhibiting behaviors you don't want to see, be careful not to inadvertently reinforce that behavior by giving it a lot of attention or by allowing students to use the behavior to escape the work. Consider the motivation behind unwanted behavior. If behavior keeps happening, something is reinforcing it, meaning the student gets or gets out of something when they engage in that behavior. Some things may be reinforcing to some students and not reinforcing to others. As you get to know your students, you'll get to know what's reinforcing to them. It can also help to talk to their former teachers, their parents, and the students themselves to find out what things they find motivating and what they're willing to work for.